It seems to be part of everyone's spiritual journey that God feels distant at times, sometimes very distant. This experience manifests itself in a variety of ways. Feelings of emptiness, aridity, dryness, and inability to concentrate during prayer, and even a sense of abandonment. And quite naturally, these feelings make us yearn for a return to those times when we felt God's consoling presence. But while this yearning is indeed natural, the fact is, times of dryness, aridity, and the like are also a natural and even a necessary part of our spiritual journey. Though they can be a sign that something is wrong, they can also be a sign that something is quite right, that our relationship with God is in fact maturing and deepening. And while this won't necessarily change the feeling, we should keep in mind that feelings, powerful and seemingly irresistible as they can be in the moment, are just that, feelings. And though feelings are part of who we are, though they were given to us by God and help guide and inform our intuition and motivate us to action, they're also somewhat akin to the check engine light in our car. The check engine light tells us that we need to pay attention to something, but even when the light is correct, it's not very specific, and quite often lights up when nothing is in fact wrong. It simply needs to be reset. Feelings, too, can be like this. Keeping this in mind may be some consolation for us, no pun intended. But before moving on to instances where the check engine light comes on when nothing is in fact wrong, let's treat the case where we should not ignore it. Namely, when our conscience trips the light, if you will, due to sin. Now, it would be going too far afield to address here, but conscience is not a feeling, but rather part of our intellect, and so, properly formed, is much more reliable than our feelings. In any case, when we sin, we can, like Adam and Eve, actually want God to be far away, to not notice us, if you will. And if we, God forbid, sin mortally, we have, in fact, deliberately severed our relationship with Him. But even then, He stands at the door and knocks that we might accept the grace of forgiveness and restore that relationship. With that as a brief introduction, on what other occasions might we feel God is distant? The first occasion might surprise you, though I would assert it's probably a fairly common occurrence. It's when things in our estimation are going well. Now, to be fair, it's not so much that God feels distant in this circumstance as it is that we don't notice Him, being distracted by, in this case, good circumstances, which, by the way, are His gift to us. This can also happen when we get lost in the busyness of ordinary life. Again, God is not distant per se, we just don't notice His presence. But for many, it is in the face of tragedy or other trauma that God can seem distant. And in the shock of the immediate circumstances, this is quite natural. Why? And where is God in all this are questions we rightly ask in these situations. But the testimony of Job from the Old Testament reminds us that though God felt distant to Job in all that befell him, though Job did not understand all that was happening, and though he ultimately did not receive any answers from God as to why, Job nevertheless, despite the emotions welling up within him, remained faithful and never doubted God's love for him. Some, in the face of tragedy, have a completely different reaction. I've spoken to many people over the years who, when they were first diagnosed with a serious illness or cancer, experienced a peace and the presence of God like they never had before. They had been wounded by God, if you will, but experienced peace nonetheless. More on that later. For those actively seeking a deeper relationship with God, this distant feeling can be a sign of progress and evidence of a maturing spirituality as God weans us from loving consolation, if you will, to loving Him. He wants to wean us from the milk of consolation so that we can mature on the meat, if you will, of doing His will. Jesus said, "I have food you do not know about, doing the will of my Father." And this determination to do the Father's will is what brings us through St. John of the Cross's dark night of the senses and the spirit, where not only does God feel distant, but it even seems that He has abandoned us. Given we are called to embrace the cross as our Lord Himself did, we should not be surprised that this most difficult of trials can be part of our spiritual journey. Saint Therese of Lisieux, in her autobiography, wrote, "Do not think I am overwhelmed with consolations. Far from it. My joy consists in being deprived of all joy here on earth. Jesus does not guide me openly. I neither see nor hear Him." St. Teresa of Avila experienced 18 years of aridity, and in her book, The Interior Castle, wrote, quote, "I will only warn you that when you learn or hear that God is granting souls graces like visions and so on, you must never beseech or desire Him to lead you along this road. It shows a lack of humility, and it is presumption to want to choose one's own path. There are many saintly people who have never known what it is to receive a favor of this kind, and there are others who receive such favors although they are not saintly." Unquote. Ralph Martin, a well-known Catholic writer and theologian, related how that for nearly 50 years, Mother Teresa of Calcutta was left almost totally bereft of consolation. She carried out her mission with virtually no sensible experience of God's love and presence. She could see the fruit that her work was producing. She could see that when she spoke to her sisters and others that they came alive and grew in the experience of God's love. But she herself, for the most part, felt only emptiness. During the first 11 years of this darkness, Mother Teresa was deeply troubled by it. It wasn't until she met Father Joseph Neuner, a Jesuit working in India, that she came to grasp some of the special meaning of her suffering. Father Neuner explained to her that this was a special gift that God was giving to her to participate in the sufferings of Christ, particularly in Jesus' own sense of abandonment during His agony in the Garden of Gethsemane before the crucifixion. Later, Mother Teresa wrote to Father Neuner, "I can't express in words the gratitudes I owe you for your kindness to me," she wrote. "For the first time in 11 years, I have come to love the darkness. For I believe now that it is a very, very small part of Jesus' darkness and pain on earth. You have taught me to accept it as a spiritual side of your work," as you wrote. Today, I really feel a deep joy, she continued, that Jesus can't go any more through the agony, but that he wants to go through it in me. More than ever, I surrender myself to him. Yes, more than ever, I will be at his disposal." Unquote. Not that the aridity didn't continue to torment Mother Teresa. She described her soul as like an ice block. Yet she recognized Neuner's key distinction, writing, "I accept not in my feelings, but with my will, the will of God. I accept his will." And that is the main point for our spiritual journey. Our feelings and emotions, both good and bad, can be strong, but they're nevertheless quite subjective. They, like a check engine light, can alert us to something important, but they're often unreliable and simply need to be reset. As St. John of the Cross said in his poems in so many different images and ways, we have been wounded by God's love, and we will not be satisfied until we are in the arms of our lover. This is even true for God. Our love for him inflames his desire to draw us to him. In the spiritual canticle, using the imagery of two turtle doves who will not rest until they're united with their mate, St. John of the Cross tells us it is God who is guiding our journey to him, and that he too, that is God, bears the wounds of love. In our spiritual journey, our Lord is guiding us on the path that will most swiftly bring us to him. When this path includes times when God feels distant, let us bravely bear this, our wounds of love, knowing that he too bears wounds of love for us. In the Anima Christi prayer, we find the following words: "Within your wounds conceal me. Permit me not to be parted from you." When we hide ourselves in the wounds of Christ, are we not as close to him as we possibly can be?